Good evening, everyone. Welcome to our conversation titled To GFK by Sergio Lombardo. This evening, we have the pleasure of hosting Professor Miriam Mirolla and Dr. Mindy Farmer, who are here in the audience with us, who will discuss the iconic depictions of President John Fitzgerald Kennedy. Moreover, we are honored by artist Sergio Lombardo, virtually joining us to share his vision and inspiration. We are truly grateful for the presence of these illustrious speakers. I would also like to thank the team of the Italian Cultural Institute, as well as our colleagues at the Ministry of Foreign Affairs and International Cooperation, and of course from the Embassy of Italy, for contributing to this project. At this time, please join me in welcoming to the podium Deputy Out of Mission Minister Alessandro Gonzalez for his opening remarks.
Thank you very much. First of all, cari amici, dear friends, benvenuti all'Ambasciata d'Italia. Welcome to the Embassy of Italy, also on behalf of Ambassador Mariangela Zappia, who is not able to be here with you all, with us all, but would like to bring her regards to everybody. It's an important day today, by the way. I want to stress that it's Europe Day, and we celebrated also through this beautiful event. We're very happy to gather you here for an event which will allow us to explore the fascinating interrelation between politics, media, and art. So let me first express my gratitude to the curator of this project, Professor Miriam Mirolla, who has dedicated her career to researching in the field of art and psychology. When she proposed the exhibition of the two paintings of John Fitzgerald Kennedy to our wide network of consulates and Italian cultural institutes in the United States, the embassy has immediately embraced the idea and organized a sort of art tour. In August, the portraits will be on display in New York, then in Boston in November, the month of JFK's assassination, and finally in Miami in December in our newly opened Italian Cultural Institute. So many thanks also to our staff at the embassy and the director of the Institute of Culture for realizing all this. As you all know, this year marks the 60th anniversary of the assassination of President John Fitzgerald Kennedy. But after less than 3 years of his mandate as President of the United States, but despite this relatively short time in office, he was able to profoundly impact not only this country, but the whole world at a time of great change. He interpreted a key role, the role of the President of the United States, in a very modern way, leaving an undeniable legacy in our culture. He was, of course, a politician of great vision. I'm just thinking about his concept of the new frontier, or the unforgettable speech about the race to the moon, when he said, we choose to go to the moon and to do other things, not because they are easy, but because they are hard. And this is something that remains, in a way, still very present in our imagination. He was certainly a very energetic and charismatic figure, and he was and still is a highly recognizable figure. In other words, he became a true international icon, almost a pop star, inspiring several generations after him. All these aspects that were, as I said, very present in the United States, but also at international level and in Italy, emerge in the extraordinary works created by an Italian artist, Sergio Lombardo, in the early 60s. Only a truly sensitive artist would have been able to capture the essence of political language, psychology, and communication, exploring how mediatic resonance turns individuals into icons. We are then very happy that Sergio Lombardo is going to be able to join us virtually this evening to share his idea and explain the artistic process. And when discussing the iconography of an American president, the National Portrait Gallery represents a natural partner institution. Therefore, I would like to warmly thank Dr. Mindy Farmer for juxtaposing the portraits created by Sergio Lombardo with those by Elaine de Kooning, author of the official portrait of JFK hung in the America's President's wing at the NPG. This exhibition is very unique, I would say, since every portrait is a sort of political manifesto. So it's absolutely a place to visit, and I can say one of my favorite spots in Washington. So let me stop here. I look forward, as you all are, to listening to our speakers as we delve into the topic of the relationship between mass media representation and political figures. So I now leave the floor to the speakers. Thank you and enjoy the seminar.
Thank you, Minister Gonzalez. Now, please join me in welcoming to the podium, to the stage, Dr. Mindy Farmer and, of course, curator Professor Miriam Mirolla, as well as we can see on the screen the artist Sergio Lombardo. So, Sergio Lombardo, dear artist, the floor is yours.
I'm glad to hear this conference, this speech about me, and it's very interesting to see ourselves from outside. I'm glad to hear you, and I will be glad to answer any question that you will ask to me. I will speak about a long time ago, when I was a young boy. I was 20, 21, when I painted politicians, not as portrait, but as persons of power. And the power was communicated by the posture of the figure, by non-verbal communication. A non-verbal communication that go through perception that is unconscious, and that the rationality will never get, will never grab, will never understand. But the communication, non-verbal, is so immediate that is perceived directly, unconsciously, by everybody. Like the animal communication, the animal attitudes, you know. So this was the main problem that I tried to see, to front, to solve when I painted the typical gestures. But always I was interested in non-verbal communication and in lateral communication, lateral perception, for example. The eye perception is based on the fovea, the direct perception that is rational and conscious and conscious. But the bastoncelli, the lateral perception, is about white and black situations, mostly nocturnal perception and emotive, especially concerning the issue of attack defense, very primordial, very primitive perception, communication, behavior, and so on of every animal, not only humans. This peculiarity is on white and black, that is in evening, on night perception, nocturnal perception, or in immediate subliminal perception that is based on something that you are not conscious to see, but you will dream in the night because they become what Freud said, residui diurni, residuals of the day that are that in the night start the dream and are activated by the brain to solve difficult problems that are of which we are not conscious at all. So if you see my work from this point of view, you will understand more or less everything. Also, you must think that the work of art for me is a stimulus that create an event in the brain of the perceivers. This means that each person that see the work of art that is confronted with the work of art interpret or see different things from another and also from himself in different times. This is the base, the simple base of eventualism, and this is coherent, consistent with the lateral perception of which I spoke before. I just said little. Sorry for the English. It is very late at this time in Rome, and thank you very much. I will listen to you carefully. Thank you.
Thank you, Sergio.
Grazie.
Okay. So thank you, everybody, for being here. Thank you to Ministro González for your words. And thank you so much for letting me organize this exhibition and seminar in such a crucial place for Italian diplomacy and culture, the Embassy of Italy in Washington, D.C. The exhibition is the first appointment of 4. After Washington, D.C., it will go to New York City, Boston, and Miami. It's a very concentrated exhibition, but particularly intense, because in just 2 paintings, we can explore a whole world: JFK's story and legacy, the relation between Italian and American art in the early 60s, and more importantly, we can go through a long artistic life of an Italian artist, Sergio, and get the sense of his extraordinary artistic research. Who is Sergio Lombardo? Which is his role and place in contemporary art history? Sergio Lombardo is a versatile artist who deals with mathematics, aesthetic, and psychology. Founder of eventualist theory, founder and director of Rivista di Psicologia dell'Arte, this one, the very first review for art psychology in Italy since 1979. From a very young age, Sergio became famous by highlighting himself within the group of Scuola di Piazza del Popolo at the Galleria La Tartaruga in Rome, in which at the time Plinio De Martis worked together with Leo Castelli and Ileana Sonabend from New York. These gallerists were the creators of the entire Western art avant-garde. And for an art historian, it's really interesting to explore the dynamics between art and politics at that time, when art movements became a weapon of Cold War. Let's get a look to the first of the two paintings. This is Sergio in the early 60s. This is the Rivista Psicologia dell'Arte. You can see a lot of numbers, one number each year. This is the last one. And this is the Scuola di Piazza del Popolo. As you can see, the three young artists at the bottom, and then all the group of Italian artists of Scuola di Piazza del Popolo. And these are the three protagonists of this story, Plinio De Martis, Leo Castelli, and Ileana Sonnaben. And this painting was made in the period that goes from 61st to 63rd as a part of a family of paintings called typical gestures. The typical gestures are basically the enlargement of the gestures of the most important heads of state of the Cold War, captured in their nonverbal language. Nonverbal language is an interesting topic in psychology and sociology because it has to do with the theory of personality, spontaneity, and deepness. Lombardo wrote about it in 1963, and a few years later, Desmond Morris, too, will intensely devote his research to nonverbal language. Let's look deeper at the painting. JFK is smoking a Cuban cigar, so it was a moment of pleasure for the president. We know he was really in love with Cuban cigar. But it was also the beginning of one of the most dangerous moments in our history since the Cuban crisis was at the beginning. Kennedy managed the crisis in 3 steps: practicing the primacy of diplomacy, improving a direct line with Nikita Khrushchev, containing all the internal interests towards war. Thanks to these 3 key elements, Kennedy became a worldwide legendary president. Technically speaking, this silhouette is not imagined by the artist from scratch. It was taken by a photo from the media of those days. And this is precisely one of the axioms of pop art. The new imagery must come out directly from the media. No personal expressiveness or talent is needed anymore to represent the new world. This is why we should consider Sergio Lombardo more of a conceptual artist than a figurative one. He focuses exclusively on the perceptive effect that doesn't go through the consciousness, but directly into the individual unconscious. No details, but black and white silhouette. Much bigger than the viewer feeling like a kid in front of a powerful figure, a paternal authority. This image is planned to be a psychological stimulus, as Sergio said before, that provokes individualized reactions in the viewer's mind, provoking a psychological event. In the early 60s, typical gestures were assimilated to the Italian pop art Scuola di Piazza del Popolo. You may ask, which are the differences between American pop art and Italian pop art made by the artists of Scuola di Piazza del Popolo? This is a very interesting debate. The avant-garde mood was similar, both descending from futurism, but the values and the contexts were very, very different. The peculiarity of Sergio Lombardo was that while American pop artists were introducing the media language in the representation of industrial products, Lombardo was introducing human beings seen as industrial products, JFK as a product, and as a project of industrial foreign policy, a new kind of emotional brand. Nowadays, the typical gestures have been exhibited in the US at International Pop Exhibition in Minneapolis, Dallas, and Philadelphia, and at the World Goes Pop exhibition at Tate Modern in London. A few paintings of him are in private collections, and a JFK painting has been acquired by Philadelphia Museum of Art. Why did Sergio Lombardo, right after the typical gestures, paint politicians in colors, and particularly this JFK in blue, red, and white? A new phase was beginning, the phase of algorithms, which anticipates everything that would have happened in the 90s. To understand the politicians in colors, we have to go back to the monochromes. The previous series of painting by Sergio Lombardo, even before the typical gestures, they were coming from the Duchamp's questioning about art or anti-art, and they were made in 1958-61. The monochromes made by Sergio Lombardo came from a conceptual task to glue a certain number of rectangles on a square and then paint them rapidly. No talent is needed, no expressivity is requested. The monochromes are very important in Lombardo's research because they allow him to introduce for the first time in painting conceptual algorithms and the graph theory, where the image is reduced to a map. Art as a mathematical problem. Nevertheless, this painting maintains a strong pop art impact. What if we compare it with something similar in the same years? Among the American pop artists, Warhol and Lichtenstein are the ones who make faces. Let's make a comparison between Warhol and Lombardo. As you can see, Warhol chromatized the industrial image to increase its seduction, being able to abolish the erratic artwork and at the same time returning back to the erratic artwork itself. Sergio Lombardo instead makes the face a two-dimensional planar map, separating light from shadows, filling the countries with a minimum number of colors, and with the intention of mere painting, with no talent or expressiveness. Warhol arbitrarily chooses where to color. You can see the eyes, the mouth, and the hair, like doing an industrial makeup on Marilyn. On the other hand, Lombardo works according to an algorithm when he paints the areas of the map by performing a task without any talent, but a scientific approach. The conclusion is that Lombardo perfectly embodies the futurism avant-garde, anticipates conceptualism, minimalism, and that is why today he competes with young people who deal with artificial intelligence. It is not coincidence that one of the themes of our time is the face recognition operated by machines. To conclude, Warhol anticipates the postmodern. Sergio Lombardo anticipates the artificial intelligence. Warhol is the premise of the art market. Lombardo is the premise of art research. A research which is still evolving from the 60s till today. And this is exactly the point that makes Sergio Lombardo so important for Italian and international artistic research. Of course, it is not possible to summarize his work in a short time, since every few years it changes from a visual point of view while maintaining a strong theoretical coherence, the theory of eventualism. And in fact, years later, precisely from this JFK painting, Sergio will develop his eventualistic research furthermore. This specific painting of JFK happens to be a real milestone in Lombardo's research and life, since it allowed him to explore the perceptual process at the base of the aesthetic experience. A mathematical transformation of JFK's portrait would lead Sergio Lombardo to his most recent research called Stochastic Unpredictable Faces. While face recognition is used to control people in the age of surveillance, Lombardo utilizes algorithms to invent unpredictable faces to provoke a deep emotional event in the viewer's mind. But this is such a big affair that it deserves to be subject for another seminar to which you are all invited. Thank you for your kind attention. Thank you very much. And now I think I give the stage to Mindy Farmer, that it's really a new friend.
Can you all hear? Perfect. Thank you for that. That was amazing. It's such an honor to be here. It's such an honor to be at the National Portrait Gallery. Thank you for this invitation, and I invite you all to come to the Portrait Gallery. We're the only one of two places where you can see every single president together, the only other one being the White House. So they're the only accessible place where you can see a portrait of every president, and it's my great honor to serve as curator of that space. And what I want to talk about is a contrast. And since part of what Lombardo has done is try to invoke this emotional response, when I saw this for the first time, just as I arrived here, one of the things that really spoke to me was the contrast. And that really speaks to John F. Kennedy as a president. So I'm going to start with a few photographs. One of the great things about our collection is you'll see a few things on display, but we have far more in our collection. And we have some amazing photographs of JFK. And photographs was an important way in which people understood him and saw him. He was very photogenic. This is a great photograph of the inaugural ball, and he came into power with all this hope and youthfulness. And those contrasts were already apparent. Because we know while he seemed useful, he was also very ill. He had been injured in World War II. He dealt with back problems. And that's one of the contrasts we'll see. He also cared about his image. And this is a portrait by Jacques Lowe, who was hired by first his father and then by him to carefully craft an image. And that is the image we would come to know. And if you come to the Portrait Gallery later in August or September, you can see some more of his photographs that will be in the gallery. It's part of what we switch out every year. And in those, you can see him portrayed with his children and as a young man, which was part of that crafted image that he really sought to achieve. And while he came into office with that youthfulness and hope and concern, of course, world events were tough. This was a tricky time. This was the period of the Cold War, as you mentioned, when we would see some of the most tense times in American history that we know of. And Kennedy came into office with, unfortunately, a promise, but then very quickly a failed mission, the Bay of Pigs. In April 1961, he inherited a plan from Eisenhower, which was to send 1,500 Cuban exiles to Cuba with the intent of then inspiring a revolution. But even though these exiles were trained by the CIA, Kennedy decided not to provide any air support because the hope was that the connection between the US and these exiles would not be apparent. And that isn't at all what happened. It was immediately clear that this was a US funded mission. And of those 1,500, 1,200 would be captured and 115 killed. It wasn't a success, a failure by every measure. And with that, Kennedy came across as weak. And the press didn't help that perception, because part of the debate here would be over Kennedy's execution of an Eisenhower plan. And so this photograph captures an intimate moment, but also a tense between these two presidents and a failed mission, and what could have led to its success if there was any chance of it. Crises would continue for Kennedy and for any president. He would hold close to his family. This is, of course, him and his brother. And they would become really important to, as you mentioned, one of the most tense situations the United States had to face. And that is the Cuban Missile. These 13 days, that still today is the highest danger rating the US military has ever rated. It's really not clear what would happen here. And so Kennedy would go from that strength, that youth, that weakness, to now strength, because he would handle this well. He would handle this with power. And this would be a great success. This would be him using his diplomacy to his great advantage. And it started out as a secret. Kennedy found out that there were Cuban missiles planted in Cuba. He would back channel, so there would be diplomacy, and then he would announce it to the public. And this is a newspaper from that announcement. And this is how a lot of people would know about it, either through this newspaper or those black and white televisions. One of the things that I think especially students have a hard time understanding today is how concentrated media was. There weren't that many newspapers. There were only a few major newspapers. That was a good source of information. But then there were television channels, but not anything like we have today. There were 3 or 4 channels, and they couldn't be recorded, and they carried a sense of this joint understanding, this way for us to learn together. And so the world really learned about this together through these newspapers, through these televisions. And this was a success for Kennedy. He went from being weak initially to being strong. And then he was also kind of cool. This is a great photograph of another challenge that he would face, and I focused here on most of the domestic challenges, and that is that ongoing, as you mentioned, space race. I put this here because this is a great photograph. This is Kennedy at his height, youthful, powerful, standing next to the United States' amazing space technology that he had pushed. But it's also important to understand the larger context of our race to space. And that is, you have missiles that go up for the space race, but a missile going another way is an arms race. And so these things are truly linked. And it was during this time that Kennedy pushed, not just for the United States to land a man on the moon, which would have been a success, but he also did finally see some success in terms of that Cold War race with the USSR. Prior to Kennedy's administration, the USSR had been beating the United States in that race to space. But during Kennedy's administration, we saw the very first person to orbit space happen. So that's kind of the context in which people are learning about Kennedy. They're experiencing Kennedy and worldwide in the United States as well. And in late 1962, this is December, Elaine de Kooning is brought to what's called the Winter White House, which is Kennedy's place in Palm Springs. She's hired, interestingly, by the Harry Truman Library. That's the commission. She is many things, but she's very important to the abstract movement. And she's also an amazing writer. She is sometimes called the writer behind the abstract movement because she wrote for Art News. And so she was very pithy. And when she finally did this commission, she wrote that she hoped Harry Truman lived long enough to actually appreciate this work. So she may have been a strange choice for the Harry Truman Library, but she produces some amazing work. And one of the reasons she was appealing to Kennedy is because she was fast. She could usually do a painting in one sitting. And for someone who didn't sit still very often, that was very appealing. So she came to the Winter White House and started immediately trying to capture. And it wasn't exactly as this picture depicts. It wasn't necessarily him sitting still. It was just about him going about his day. And not in the outfits she wanted, it was in the outfits of choosing. She was basically subjected to his style. And she would produce over 100 drawings and over 23 portraits because she would become obsessed with trying to capture him. So much so that she would even sculpt him in the sand. And this is her studio. And you can see Kennedy is everywhere. And one of the things she struggled with was not just capturing the Kennedy she saw and experienced, but also capturing this world image, that's a quote from her, of this person who was always in the news and always in those black and white photographs. And that black and white portion is really important to understand because she wanted to bring color to someone she saw and experienced and saw those contradictions and the vibrancy and the youthfulness, but also struggled with what she saw in the media in terms of the newspapers and the photographs and the news. And you can see her attempts to reconcile it. And of course, some of them are quite large. Here are a few more. The one there you can see is the one that eventually would go to the Harry S. Truman Library. And she continued painting these until, of course, Kennedy was assassinated. And while Lombardo dealt with psychology intentionally, she was thrust upon her. She stopped painting for a year. And she said, quote, "Painting had become completely identified with painting Kennedy. For an entire year, I had nothing else. It was real trauma." And she stopped, completely stopped. So she went from hundreds of drawings to nothing in the wake of his. She would, however, keep going after, and she would complete these commissions. And we're really lucky to have, I think, the best of them at the National Portrait Gallery. This is our portrait that represents Kennedy at the Portrait Gallery. It's very different, but it is produced out of trauma, produced out of psychology. It's produced out of these contrasts. And when she unveiled her portrait, not here, but the one at the Truman Library, in addition to teasing Truman about eventually liking her work, she said something profound. And I'll end with this. She said, "This is not a portrait of John F. Kennedy, but all she could capture was a." So I think that's the end of my presentation. I think we're going to open up to questions and discussions. Oh, thank you.
Thank you so much. Actually, I would like to say something
Sure,
about
of course.
the colors. The yellow is yellow and green. It's really the dominant color. Her paintings and drawings. Maybe because of Florida, because I think they met in Florida, right?
They did. Florida, you can definitely see that in some of the other portraits. Yeah. I think Florida definitely influenced it, absolutely. And his sun-kissed persona.
Well, I think maybe you have some questions to Sergio Lombardo or one of Sergio, could you hear? Non ti sentiamo. Ecco, ora sì.
No,
Ora
can you
sì.
hear me?
Yes,
Good.
yes, we do.
Tell me. What is the question?
No, d'accordo.
We are waiting for questions.
Se tu hai domande da fare.
No, I have no questions. I've been listening very, very intensely, but there are too many things that has been said that for me it's too complicated to say anything.
Okay.
Thank you for very interesting discussion. Pretty tough artist stopped 1 year. She was Sergio. What happened to you when you heard that President Kennedy had? How did that impact your work, your emotional state?
Well, the emotion was terrible, of course. The emotional situation was terrible for everybody, not only for me. I didn't paint the death of Kennedy because it would be different of my style, of my interest. Because I was not interested in stories, in narrative, narrative art. I was only interested in the impact of the postures, and that person is still and have not a psychological impact to the viewer is only very sad. So I didn't work with emotions directly, of my emotions. I worked with public emotions. The emotion was public. So for me it was a shock, the death of Kennedy. It was the changing of the world in a completely different way. Also, artwork changed. I don't know if just because of the death of Kennedy, but also because of the death of Kennedy, it became more bureaucratic. The world was more diplomatic in a bad sense, in sense of hypocrite communications, and it was very far from my personality and my interests. I don't know if it's enough.
Yes, thank you. And one very quick question. You obviously very influential. Buzz your own. Who in today's terms of people painting portraits, especially portraits of presidents, are you familiar with any of them? Who do you particularly like? For example, President Obama, Michelle Obama, at the portrait, very, very well.
I worked only for research of an issue, but when the research was finished, my style changed completely, because I was coherent only with the theory, not with the exterior style, with the style of the painting. And after 1964, I was not interested anymore with faces, with not with faces, with figures, with any realistic image. I was interested then at very simple object, minimal, like lines, dots, cubes, to give to the public in order to let him make something aesthetic, something interesting, beautiful, only with a simple point, lines, and minimal elements. So, but I constructed this little simple elementary elements in such a big way, many meters, to convey the idea that the public moving a line was doing something aesthetic, something that has to do with metaphysics, with beauty, So it was completely different. I was not interested in anymore to the pictures. Thank you.
Sergio, thank you very much. You were able to capture a glimmer of what emerges in Kennedy before it emerged. I mean, nobody knew what he would become, this almost religious figure now that transcends politics, that everyone looks to as something special. So I'm wondering if you were to do it again at this point.
Do it again? What?
If you were to paint him now, because Kennedy has emerged as this almost supernatural god in many people's belief, like a cult figure. His importance didn't come out while he was a president. I mean, the documents hadn't been released. We didn't know what really went on during the Kennedy crisis. His role in a lot of different things was unknown. He was just a president, and a remarkable president at that, but not as significant as what happened to him after he passed away. He was, so I was wondering if you were going to paint him now with all of the images that exist floating around about him as these ideas, would you do it any differently?
Now I'm working with mathematics and with the topology, with graph theory. I'm working, creating faces that are unpredictable and that are impossible for humans to imagine, because they are imagined only by random numbers, that they are completely different of the human thinking, the human feeling. They are completely, I say, extra. In fact, I call them extra humans. I'm going to have an exhibition in Galleria 1 sul 9 in Rome in a few days. And so my mind now is concerned only with faces.
Se dovessi dipingere oggi Kennedy sapendo quello che è successo dopo Kennedy, come lo dipingeresti?
I couldn't paint Kennedy now. It's too difficult. It's as if I would paint God, I would paint a saint or something. It's a religious problem. It's not a problem of perception or an event. The Kennedy is just an event himself, even if dead.
nuove domande.
If there are no more questions from the audience, I don't know, Professor Mirolla, Dr. Farmer, if you have any closing remarks that you would like to share with us, or thank you.
Maybe I can just add something. The most important argument is that with Sergio, we discover another way of thinking about painting and art, that is to let people express themselves in a very measured way with method. So this is a kind of a revolution, Copernic revolution, because we are used in art to artists who are expressive. Basically, they express themselves. But he's revolutionary because he doesn't want to express himself, but he wants to invent a set, an experimental set, in order for the viewer to express himself or herself. So this is the challenge that he brings into contemporary art. He's not alone because this idea comes from futurism. So it's a very important idea, concept, that comes in the switch from 19th century to 20th century, the beginning of the century. And it's the most important idea of today, interaction theory, that moves a lot of things, of disciplines, and all our daily life is organized through interaction of things, people, and things and people. So I think the extraordinary line of research of in which Sergio is, maybe the most clear artist in that line of research. It's really amazing for us because people is at the center of the discourse, not anymore the artist, but people, but everybody, each of us, with our dreams, with our inner life. We know about psychology now. Psychology and psychoanalysis is in our everyday life and in our language. We use the words of psychology and psychoanalysis in a very quite normal way. So we are used to stress our personal life and difference. And I think it's interesting to see how this artist literally puts upside down the problem of art. And I'm very glad to be here and to have Sergio with us. And Mindy was doing a very wonderful introduction to the spirit of JFK. And I think photography is the best documentation of all the faces, the short period of life, political life of JFK, which is very important in nowadays because his way of doing foreign policy is really interesting, and it's kind of horizon for us. And by chance, this exhibition is made in the year in which we remember him after 60 years. And I would like to stress not only the year of the assassination, but the year of his speeches, and the most important speeches about peace and about, there is a sentence, we all breathe the same air. I think it's also from a sustainable point of view, it's very, very important, that message. And so I think we could say a lot of things more, but thanks to be here with us. Thank you. to all the Italian team. Thanks to all the Italian team of the embassy who was really, really involved and passionate about this project. Thank you very much.
Dr. Farmer, I don't know if you would also like to share some closing reflections with us?
Sure. I would just like, again, to echo the thanks. This has been a wonderful experience, and it's always great to talk about JFK. One of the things I say very often is that I don't, as a historian, believe in the word unprecedented. Our job is to show precedents. And so much of what we're experiencing today, we can see in Kennedy. And that's both in terms of its history and in terms of the art that it produced. I think seeing these reflections of Kennedy produced by these two artists has really made me understand it better, and I hope that we continue to seek to understand and to express and to find those precedents, because it really is the key to the future, is to understand the past. So thank you for this experience. Thank you to all of you, and please come to the Portrait Gallery and see this wonderful exhibition as it goes on a tour across the globe, as it should be. And thank you for letting me be on the stage with you. It's been such an honor.
Thank you again, everybody, for being here with us. Thank you to our wonderful speakers, and most of all to the artist who was kind enough to be with us despite the significant time difference with Italy. So thank you again, and have a good evening.
Ciao Sergio.
Ciao.
Ciao.
Ciao a tutti.